So this one from Magnetic Magazine. Eliminate shares his top 10 tips on experimentation in production and their impact on his debut album, Get Off the Internet. Full disclosure, I have not read this article. I do want to just kind of touch on some of the points that he makes here. In 2020, the world took a collective breath. Los Angeles-based artist Eliminate embraced the digital realm, captivating audiences with this playful manipulation of peculiar samples, turning them into viral beats that took everyone by surprise. Now boasting a thriving YouTube channel with over 230,000 subscribers and a TikTok page followed by 390,000 fans, Eliminate has become the leading figure in music production, known for his infectious and comedic personality. His entertaining and informative sound design tutorials have also made him one of the top music production streamers on Twitch, marking a historic moment for his career. Eliminate just released his highly anticipated debut album, Get Off the Internet, right as he made a career on the internet. He pioneers a genre-defying exploration throughout it, using elements of dubstep to hyperpop. Breaking free from electronic music norms, the album is both a musical spectacle and a rallying call for listeners and artists to push boundaries through experimentation. There was a couple notes that I thought were really interesting. So his first point here, it says, make a discovery. Sound design can be like a science experiment. The whole point of an experiment is to discover something you didn't know before. When experimenting with sound, do not always have a specific preconceived outcome in mind. Instead, embrace the fact that you are likely to land on a completely different result that might end up even better than what you had originally aimed for. Yeah, 1000% agree on this. And a lot of my live streams in the past, I do a studio stream every Tuesday night as well. And when I get into sound design, I feel like every time I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen here. I have an idea, but I don't know what's actually going to happen, you know? And just having that embrace and approach at all times, where it's like you kind of have an idea of what you're doing, but also you're not necessarily set on one thing. This is often something you discover by accident, whether that be the sound itself or the method used to obtain it. Doing this over and over again while changing things along the way will lead to an endless road of creation. Sometimes I will land on a sound and forget how I even got there because I just kept changing it. So saving multiple versions of your project files is a good idea to keep in mind. And I will isolate my sound design process if I get too deep. A lot of the times I'll just duplicate things and mute them as I duplicate them, so that I have like bookmarks of each stage when I made those sounds. You know, I'll do like a big sound design session, maybe tomorrow night for the stream. He says, get in the zone, not the comfort zone, the auto zone. If you want to branch out and create something new to you, whether that be confined strictly to sound design or just a completely new style of music itself, you are very unlikely to do so by practicing the same technique and using the same tools over and over again. There's some that I use all the time, but in different ways at different points in the processing chain. But if you're doing like compressor, EQ, distortion, spectral resonator for every single one of your sounds, you're not really going to like branch out from getting that one sound. That's like one process you can click save on, and you need to go try a combination of new things. It says try a new plugin, try several, even if the UI looks daunting and confusing. Learn a little bit about what it does and then just start playing around with it, or don't. Sometimes I would just go completely blind with zero idea of what the plugin does. This method isn't necessarily conventional, but you can still learn just through trial and error and experimentation. I kind of did this with Rift by Minimal Audio. If anyone's ever used Rift by Minimal Audio, such an awesome plugin. I mean, I figured it out eventually, but it's like a mixture of Serum Effects and Isotope Trash, where you can do like the wave shaping and, you know, distortion, but you can also drag LFOs to like different filters and there's like a filter and like a resonance section for it's kind of like a comb filter almost, but you can add tonality through resonance. Rift was one of those plugins that I use kind of blindly and just kind of click through the presets to see how it worked. And that's kind of when I put it together where I was like, oh, it's like Serum and Isotope Trash. Two plugins I had a lot of experience with, but I didn't necessarily just open Rift and was like, right? Like it took a while, but ultimately it was the understanding of two other things that helped me understand this one new thing. Yeah, it's a super fun plugin. The UI is really pretty. It's kind of hairy, but it's easy to look at. It's real visually engaging. Highly recommend Rift if you're looking to kind of push some sound design boundaries for sure. Most plugins offer free trial periods, which is what I did with Rift initially, where you can explore its full functionality before deciding if it will provide any actual use or utility to you. Close the book, expand the library. The book in this case being the book of samples you have been using in every song in the past several months or even years. Do a deep dive into sample hunting, check forums and social media, and look up a producer you like to see if they offer any of their own sample packs. More often than not, they do, which in case you can also support them at the same time. I make sure to do this every few months at least. Building your sample library over time will ensure you always have an expansive directory of options to use when writing and experimenting rather than keeping yourself confined. I want to add on to that. Go and make it easy for yourself to get to your favorite parts. Like, you're not going to download a sample pack and you're like every single thing in there. Like, take the time and go listen through things, and you can favorite them with different colors in Ableton. You could literally just drag them into a new folder and then make that available in the Ableton browser. There's that initial like suck stage that you have to like push through. But it has to come from the desire of like not wanting to do the same thing over and over again and be uncomfortable for a little bit. But if you're consistently doing that, whether it's like exploring new plugins, new sound design styles, or just, combining things you've never combined before, like a lot of the percussion beats and loops and samples, textures that I get are not from like a dubstep pack, right? It sounds something I would like, and it could be like a Afrobeats loop or one shot or whatever, but it has a texture that I like that I would have never found in a dubstep pack. So he continues, he says, a lot of times ear fatigue is developed simply because you've used the same kick or snare sample in so many songs. You have heard it yourself so many times that it becomes boring to you, which ultimately makes you believe the entirety of what you're creating is boring. Having new samples to use consistently keeps things new and exciting. And I don't, I've got a bunch of, several producer homies in here. I'm sure all of you have been in a situation where once you just change the drums of a song, it could completely flip them. You could use the same drum patterns, but better samples. I definitely have had several plugins that I bought over the years that I didn't use until way later after I bought them, like Isotope Trash being one of them. Like, I bought it because I saw, like, it might have been Skrillex, I don't know, but I saw someone say like, oh, we used Isotope Trash, and I'm like, get it, and not even knowing exactly what it was and all the different distortion models you can use. But that was like my first thing where I had like a case of shiny syndrome, and I just bought something and didn't know what it did. I didn't really use it until like 2 or 3 years later. So yeah, knowing how to use the tools you have is super important. Yeah, he said, I thought shiny UIs and more animation would make me better. Yeah, I mean, to some degree, yes, but ultimately, like, if you know what a knob is doing when you move it, it doesn't matter what it looks like. A good example would be like FM8. Like, you could get really good at Serum when you get good at FM8 or Massive or like Silent, something that's not so fun to look at. He says, twist the knob. Just start twisting knobs. Although looking up detailed explanations of how a plugin works and what a certain macro and functions do is encouraged and beneficial, it's not totally necessary, in my opinion. I will often just put a plugin on something and start moving knobs to see how it affects a specific sample or sound. I mean, and this is the cool thing is, like, if you like what's going on and you like what you're doing, put it on a rack, save it. So you don't, you can go and tweak those things in a different way to get that good sound again. If you move something and notice a cool, exciting change, automate it, then start twisting another one. Before you know it, you have 6 automation clips changing different aspects of a sound and have created something that is completely new and different from what you started with. Yeah, and that's like, you'll get better at that the more that you just sit there. Like, I'll play a loop or a sample or something, and I'll move the knob in the way that I want to, like with the mouse pad, and then I'm like, okay, that's cool, draw that in or something like that. And then same thing, like, before you know it, you have this stack of automation. And he says, if I'm going for a long session, sometimes I would just hit record and start adding plugins to a sound on a loop. The more I add, the more knobs I turn, the more I automate, the more sound continues to evolve. By the end, I have a 20 or 30 minute audio file to comb through and pick out my favorite parts. That's probably the most genius thing I've ever seen in an article. It's something that I do, but that's to do a 20 or 30 minute audio file and just recording and like testing stuff out. That's the same. You're going to get a similar result by like doing something, duplicating it muting that first one and then kind of doing that duplicate process over and over again, where you could just literally record the output of what you're doing. And then you have like a audible history of all the moves you've made. You might hit this one thing for a split second and may not even be able to get back to it by Command Zing, right? But you've got the recording, the audio recording of you hitting it for that second, and you could just boop, resample, right? And that's a good segue into this next one. He says resample, then resample again. I cannot stress how much my sound design capabilities expanded once I started resample to audio. For years, I only worked with MIDI, using synths like Serum and Massive, both to start and finish a sound. Nowadays, I simply use them as jumping off points. Same. For example, I will use Serum to craft a bass sound, whether it's from scratch or a preset. It doesn't matter, right? There's no wrong answer here. Boomer says, can you explain why resampling is so good? I know how it sounds, but I don't know how to say it in words. So the thing about resampling is that the capabilities you have to transform audio, you don't necessarily have in a MIDI form. So you being able to capture an audio file of what's happening in the output of a synth and then do the audio effects and audio like stretching, texture warping, like different things and moving, you can't get the warping result from a MIDI output, right? But the capabilities of how you can manipulate audio is just a completely similar but different layer of the abilities that you can do to manipulate a sound. And they all have their own certain texture. When I'm doing analog stuff here, I literally just hit record and I'll draw the MIDI out and I'll start turning knobs, and then I'll find a 4/8 count bar that I'm like, oh, yep, here we go. There's my loop. But yeah, so resampling, and that's a form of resampling. I'm just recording the output of the hardware synth. Resampling is recording the output of a software synth, and then you can just do that over and over and over again. But you can't necessarily get the results you would get from stretching audio from just using MIDI. And that's kind of the driest way I could put it. He says, I mess around with it in the plugin for a while, maybe make a pattern or place a macro where it's controlling something specific. Then once I have something I like, I'll bounce it to audio. I did not touch Edison and FL Studio for nearly 10 years. Now I use it in every session. Once I have the audio, I'll begin placing additional effects and plugins onto that piece of audio. Perhaps if I get somewhere with that, I will resample it again. You can do this endlessly, but obviously the goal is to stop once you have something you like. And the result is often way more complex than anything you could do in MIDI alone. Yeah. The best part is it's in audio, so it ends up being much less CPU intensive. Also another reason resampling is super good. I love this article. When I clip this video, I'm going to put it in the description. I would recommend going checking this out. It's on Magnetic Magazine. Definitely listen to what he has to say about this. The last one I want to read here is make a sample pack for yourself. The thought of making a sample pack usually comes with the idea that you will sell and distribute it to the public in some form or another. This doesn't need to be the case. I've made a handful of sample packs for producers to use, but we'll make sample packs in the same manner that only I have access to. For example, I would sit down in the DAW with no intention of working on a song or anything. Instead, I'll just hit record and start creating noise. That's kind of what I was saying earlier. Do this for an hour or so and start compiling one-shots, loops, and anything at all, really. Consolidate them into a folder in the same manner as a sample pack and just keep it for yourself. So you're essentially making your own palette of sounds that you made for you to pick from, right? And I wouldn't even limit yourself to just audio effect racks, instrument racks. If you stack 10 synths on top of each other and you don't want to redo that, save it as a instrument rack in Ableton, or make it easy for you to just click and drag that back and use it as you used it. And this is stuff I'll dive in more with tomorrow. So be sure to tune into that stream because this article has inspired me for what I'm going to do tomorrow. I regularly find myself working on a song and finding sounds I made months prior to use in a project. Sometimes you'll forget that you even made them or what they sound like, which can be extremely refreshing thing to happen if you become stuck on a song. Yeah, and again, it's like if you just isolate your sound design process and just fill your basket with things that you like, that you made, that you know what I mean? Whether it's like a preset that you twisted into oblivion, audio that you manipulated and mangled into oblivion, it doesn't really matter, right? Creating a pack of yourself for yourself, if that makes sense. So I think this whole article was super informative. I really really recommend going to read all of it and put these things into practice, because it's especially if you're a bass music or like sound design heavy producer, you got to keep that refreshed process. And if you're comfortable, you're probably falling behind. That's what, in my experience, that's what's happened to me. It's like I got comfortable with the process, and I can only do that process in so many different ways that make sense for my music. Not that there is infinite ways to do, one thing, I guess, theoretically, but ultimately how it applies into the music you're making, very limited. And this is just my experience. I'm not saying it's how it is.